Hello and welcome to Jamhammer. In this video we're going to be taking a look at painting up some Dark Angels Tactical Marines. So if you've been following along with the video series, we've previously been looking at a Dark Vengeance box set, unboxing what's in that, and then we had a look at prepping miniatures ready for painting. So we're going to be using the tactical squad that we prepped up in that video to paint here today. So you need to get some hobbying materials for this. First and foremost, you're going to need some brushes. Basically, I've got a set of brushes here, but you can get away with 3 brushes really. You just need a large brush for doing sort of large pieces like armour, a smaller brush for doing any finer details like in these Marines putting out the eyes, and then maybe an old brush or a bespoke brush for dry brushing. Throughout this video, I'm basically just going to be using this general size 5 brush. It should be fine for most of the detail because you can see it comes to a nice point. I'm also going to be using this box of paints. So this is a starter set of paints from Vallejo. It's really good value for the set that you get. You've got pretty much all the colours that you could need, and any sort of bespoke colours that you can either buy and add to this set, or if you're good at it, if you've got an eye for it, you could probably just use the paints that are in this set as a really good base to mix the colours that you need. So what I'll do is, as with the other videos, I'll leave a link to this box set, as well as the other materials that I've used, like this pack of brushes, and then if you felt like getting those as well, you can click on the link in the description. It's an Amazon affiliate link. A little bit of money will go to help support the channel. I can put back into the channel to reinvest and get some more miniatures and more materials. So you're also going to need a palette. You can just use a basic one, like this one that I've got, which just cost a couple of quid. You could use a wet palette if you have one, or if you wanted to build your own, or even just a plate or a piece of glossy tile, anything like that, where you can mix some paints on it, that will be sufficient. We're also going to be using a few washes for this paint through today. I'm using these ones from Army Painter, but any manufacturers, you could use their black and brown, that'd be great. I'll say now actually, the Army Painter ones, they actually turned out when they dried to be quite glossy, so we'll have a little bit more on that later. So perhaps if you're also painting Space Marines, you might want to look at the Citadel range, the Agrex shade and the Null Oil, or as I say, other browns and blacks would be fine. The Army Painter ones were fine, it's just for the use that I wanted them here today, it wasn't perfect. Finally and foremost, you just need to get yourself set up with a work surface, get all this stuff ready to go. So I'll be using this rickety old desk and an old lamp. I know that you can get these really great model grips that you can use to hold your miniatures while painting, and they look really useful. So here is a old cork with some blue tack attached. Actually, this isn't even blue tack, this is off-brand white putty, so yeah, classy as ever on this channel. But you can basically jam a model on there and it'll hold fine, fingers crossed, and it just gives you a little bit of extra something to grip onto so you can keep steady whilst you're applying paint to that miniature. So you also need to grab yourself some clean water. Just got this in an old jar here, and a little bit of paper. I've got some kitchen roll here just to clean and dry your brushes. It's also worth mentioning as well that you're going to need water on standby to thin your paint as well. So with these Vallejo bottles that I'll be using, you pretty much have to dispense the paint anyway. But kind of regardless anyway, if you are using miniature paints from a part, like using Citadel's range of paints, or something similar to that, even though it is in that pot, you'll still need to use a palette, to just to mix your paint with some water so that it flows nicely. So you're kind of looking for this kind of consistency here. If you are in doubt, it's always better to sort of err on the side of going too thin rather than too thick, because if the paint is too thick, what's going to happen is it's going to settle in the recesses of your miniature and it's going to obscure those nice details. So it's a good idea to sort of err on the side of caution, go for a nice thin paint, and then if you need to, as we will do throughout this video, you should always paint over another thin layer. Just paint that over the top just to cover any strokes or streaks that have come through. I think this is why it's quite handy as well to have a white plastic palette like this one, or a plate or something, so that you can sort of test the consistency of the paint prior to applying it to make sure that it is flowing nicely, it's flowing smoothly, and it's behaving the way that we want it to. So now it's time to apply the base coat. So using the nice thin green paint here, have at it. So we're just basing here, so you just basically just need to slap the paint on nice and quick. No need to be too careful. You can try to avoid the points that are going to be white or cream, so like the unit citation on the shoulder of this model, or any cloth on the miniature, or on the Space Marine here on the quilla on the chest. It's no big deal if you do get some green paint on it at this stage though. It's very early on in the process. You can always cover this up, and it's only the first layer. If you do have an appropriate dark green spray paint or even a paint gun, it'd be really helpful to sort of speed things up if you've got that, but if you don't, a nice big soft brush that I don't own, obviously, would also be useful just to make this process a little bit quicker, get this arm painted up to the correct colour. So you can see here that as well as the main features of the armour, I'm also coating the backpack too. Now, I didn't coat the main vents on the top here, as I was going to paint them metallic, so I didn't really see the point in getting that green base coat. I changed my mind on this later on, so they might see some discrepancies later on down the line in the video. So if you feel like it, you can go ahead and paint those same colour as the base coat, which I did eventually do, or up to yourself if you want to leave those and paint them metallic, by all means, you know, your miniatures. Once you're happy with this and you've got a nice thin even coat all over the miniature, move on to the next one and you just let this one dry. So don't need to worry at this point if say you've missed any parts. We're going to come back and go over this again later, just getting that preliminary coat on for now, nice and quick. So here are some of the other miniatures with that first base coat, and you can see that it's really patchy in places. We've still got that grey primer coming through, but it's okay because we're going to need to go over this again, just in the exact same way, with another nice thin coat of our dark green paint. So it's the same thing here, just going over all those bits of armour, maybe catching any of those bits that you did miss last time that are still completely grey, giving them a nice base coat of the dark green. If you're also doing a large unit like this as a 10-man tactical squad, you can move through them one at a time. By the time you're finished with the last miniature in the unit, the first one's going to be dry again, so it's ready for the next stage of the painting process. And then if we take a look here, we can compare one of the ones that we did earlier and one that we've just done now with that second coat. So you can see here, if we compare them, that the one with just the one layer, you can still see some of that grey coming through, you can really see the brush strokes, but the second one you can already see it's a much more robust green colour, less of that grey coming through, and we've smoothed out some of those blemishes. So now that we have a lovely green base coat, it's time to move on to the parts of the mini that we painted black. So just going to prep this Vallejo black here. It's important to shake your paints up just to make sure that the pigment is evenly distributed throughout. Yeah, I'm using the Vallejo black paint here, but again, whatever brand of paint you have to hand, just use that, thin it down a little, and we're just going to paint the bases. As this colour is darker than the green, I'm going to try not to hit any of the armour, he says as he gets a massive stroke across that leg, but as in this case, no worries. If we do get it on there, we can always go back, we'll put a bit more of that dark green over there and cover it up. So I'm also going to use the black here to pick out these sort of rubber bits at the back of the knee here on this joint. I'm going to paint those black, but in a dark grey or something like that would work just as well. Or if you're so inclined, you can just leave those dark green as well. They wouldn't look out of place. And apologies for the lack of consistency here, but I forgot to base the metal colours with black before applying the metallic paint to them. So it's not a problem if you do too, it still looks fine, especially if you do have some of that black wash to paint over the top. But you do get better results if you apply the metallic colours over a dark base, so I'm just going to paint these black now. So I'd recommend doing the same if you get the chance. Okay, so back to the original timeline. We're going to move on to applying a bone colour or an off-white colour to the mini. I don't think I've made a video yet where I've not managed to drop something. So for the Dark Angels, we want to pick out the aquila here. Now these are kind of notoriously difficult to get at, especially with the bolter across the chest on a lot of these sort of poses that these figures have. So no worries if you get some of that white on the green armour here. So we can always paint over that again later with some of the original dark green base coat. Whilst we're going over here, we also want to pick out any of these sort of papery bits that are dangling down from the battle honours. So yeah, paint those up with that off-white too. Now the veteran sergeant, he's going to require a little bit more attention. As you can see, he's got this sort of flowing robe on the front of his armour. So I want to pick this out in a pale bone colour too. And same again, we're going to give that a nice thin coat. And for a larger piece on a miniature like this, it's much more noticeable. You can see that grey coming through again underneath. So what we're going to do is going to paint that thin coat of the off-white, and then we're going to go over it again with a second thin coat, and just going to apply that on there rather than trying to do it all in one stage with a thick coat of paint and then possibly obscuring the details. I'll pick out that second coat, and we'll take a look at that looks like now. You can see that's nicely covered over. And I also forgot to mention that I picked out the flesh of the sergeant as well with the off-white. Rest assured we'll darken this later because he's glowing like a literal angel at the minute. So next, we're going to move on to, if you've got a dark brown paint, or even if you've got a bespoke colour for this, to pick out any of the leather parts on your marine. Just give these a quick coat. Usually these tactical marines or marines will have a belt around the midriff, some pouches, but be on the lookout for any sort of pistol holsters or bandoliers or straps on their bolters or anything like that. So next up, we want to pick out the red areas on the mini. So for Dark Angels, we've got a few bits here that need to be painted red. So we've got the bolter casing, the right shoulder if your model has the infantry symbol sculpted on it, the ribbons on their battle honours, and kind of most intimidatingly, the eyes. So we'll start with the largest part first. We'll pick out that bolter casing. No need to be too neat again at this point, and if we do end up running over and painting a finger or two like I just did there, we can always come back over again at a late stage with a bit more of that dark green paint. So most Marines, if you're using the sort of standard box of Marines or Primaris, they're going to have blank shoulders here, so you might not even need to do this step, and you can just apply a transfer. But the Dark Vengeance Marines that I got in this box set do have them sculpted on. So I'm just going to put a coat of red on here and, of course, completely miss and get red all over the shoulder. So just something else to touch up later, no big deal. And now, with trembling hands, get your brush to a nice fine point and careful. Dot the eyes. Nice. Let's get those ribbons nice and red too, so it's looking like a Christmas decoration on an evergreen. We'll also need to paint the special and heavy weapons. They're going to be red, much like the bolters. Whew, look at the plasma on that. The sergeant will also need his pistol and chainsword painting up with this red too. And then we'll very carefully try and pick out any extra sort of embellishments that might look good in red. So for the sergeant, we've got this little sword emblem on his cloth robe, as well as there's like a little thin line of red. So I gave some parts of the red, some of the larger pieces, especially that shoulder, a second thin coat of paint, just to make sure that colour was blocked out really nicely, and to make sure that none of that grey was coming through. Now if you get out a regular white paint, and we're going to paint over the left shoulder emblem. Again, if you're using standard Marines or Primaris, you can probably just apply a transfer here, but if you do have sort of custom shoulder pads for Dark Angels, or these particular miniatures, they have got an embossed area, and we're just going to pick this out with that white paint. With painting such a light colour white over this grey, we are going to need definitely 2 thin coats of this as well to really make it pop. We're also wanting to pick out any feathers with this same white paint. So there's not too many parts on these standard Dark Angels, but the Deathwing and Ravenwing in the box sets, sort of as their name suggests, they are festooned with feathers. So for these miniatures, it's basically just that standard thing that's sticking up from the sergeant's backpack there, and also just going to pick out some of those extra bits in white, so that rope here that's strung across the off-white cloth. So these guys, being plasma fetishists, also known as Dark Angels, will need to go over the plasma coils with a nice blue. The one I'm using here from the Vallejo box set, it's a bit dark for this, so maybe if you do have a brighter blue that really pops, you could use that, or even better, what you could do is paint the area white, and then either thin down a blue paint, or if you've got a blue wash, just pop that over the top and it should create a nice sort of glowing effect on those plasma coils. So yeah, I would recommend doing that, because I would not want to offend these Dark Angels by not appropriately capturing the essence of pure plasma for them. So if you've got a grey paint, or you could also just add a little bit of white to a black paint, I just want to paint over the bases. So we don't want to completely obscure that black that we've painted on here. So instead of actually painting it as we would for the rest of the miniature, we're going to overpaint it. So that is, we're just going to use a little less paint on the brush than we usually would. I'm just going to lightly trace over the details, just allowing it to catch and cover those raised areas, but without sinking into the recesses. We can always apply a black wash over this, so not to worry if it does sink in too much or you're a bit overzealous with that grey paint, so we can always touch it up later. Okay, and now we're back to that future timeline. What a journey. So using a suitably industrial looking metallic paint, we want to go over all those bits that we based in black before and paint these. So for this, I picked out the barrel of the bolt gun, magazine and trigger area, the top rail, as well as some of the vents and ports on the backpack. I also went over the rubber bits of the armour, but in hindsight, they'd probably be better in a dark grey just to kind of connote that they are rubber rather than exposed metal piping, but you know, you live and learn. It's all a process. So we'll also need to pick out some of the metal on the specialists. So for this plasma cannon, what I did is painted most of the exposed circuitry of the gun, as well as this pipe connecting it to the power pack, and then just around the barrel there. For the sergeant, what I want to do is get all those metal pieces as well, so the ones around the chainsword, including the teeth, and then, yeah, the same again, the barrel around the plasma pistol. So last, but certainly not least, is to pick out a few more of these bits of decoration and things on the miniatures. We're going to pick these out with gold, so there's a dangly dagger here, and also a skull on the backpack, and a scroll across the bolter. So I reckon that this scroll on the bolter would be metal rather than actual paper, so we're going to pick that out in gold. Now for the sergeant, he's a fancy lad, so we have this golden aquila emblem that he's got hanging down here, as well as a sensor, so we're going to paint those gold, as well as the edge around his backpack, trophy, statue thing. Gonna pick out the skull on his backpack too. And this dagger looks a bit superfluous for war, considering it's so inconveniently located, like way on the backpack there, and considering he's wielding that huge chainsword, so gonna make sure that looks purely ornamental, and I'm just gonna pick that out in gold too. So all the main colours are now done. This is a good chance to go over your miniature and tidy up any of those missed areas that you might have passed by, or any slip-ups that you may have had. So for myself, I'm going to go back over and paint those large vents into green as I promised. I'm also going to tidy up that shoulder that I liberally daubed in red. And I'm also going to tidy up this chap's leg. And there we go. Neat and tidy and ready to take a dip. So we want to kind of dilute these colours a little bit, but mostly what we want to do is bring out some contrast. So with a brown wash, we'll want to go over all the off-whites, golds, browns and reds. So for these marines, that's the chest here, the bolter, the battle honours, the eyes, as well as the pouches and the belt. So you can really just liberally glob this on there, but I would say just to make sure that it doesn't pool in any areas or it can dry and leave these sort of ugly tide marks on your marine. So you can see here that I also apply brown wash to the whites on the shoulder and various other areas, but in retrospect that kind of made it look a bit dirty rather than shaded, so I'd recommend actually applying black wash to these white areas instead for the contrast. So we also want to apply this brown wash to the sergeant's cloth here, as well as his exposed flesh, just to tone that down, really bring out the detail. So then moving on to the black wash, we just want to apply that to the silver metal as well as the armour. So as I said at the beginning of this video, the wash that I tested was quite glossy. So when it dried, it sort of produced this shimmery, glossy look to the marine's armour, which wasn't really the look that I was going for. So instead, what I'm doing here is I'm just running some of that black wash into those recesses, just to build up the shadow instead and try and stop that glossy effect from happening across the armour. So here is the test marine actually that I did before the video. So you can see here that it looks like he's been caught in the rain or he's slipped into a tub of Vaseline, and I'm just not a fan of the way that this turned out. So what I did to correct this was I've bought a bottle of matte varnish. So I'm just daubing this all over the miniature, allowing it to dry, and back to regular marine armour. So it can be really useful having this gloss, sheen to your miniatures if you want something to look wet like water or blood, but I'm not a fan of the way that it looks for the Dark Angel's armour. But then I got this varnish. It means that the miniature is sort of more protected so that the paint won't chip or damage as easily, so it's kind of a happy accident really. What I'll do is, I quite like this, a Vallejo varnish. I'll leave a link to that in the description as well, because it really did save the day for me. So if we go back to the black wash stage, we can also apply a bit of this to the bases if they're looking a little bit too bright or garish, or if, like me, you went a little bit trigger happy with the grey paint. I think this does a lot as well, just to add some more texture and depth to the miniature. Alright, and here are the results. So these miniatures are now ready for use on the tabletop. They're ready to see combat in glorious service to the Emperor. So there's more that could be done to improve these miniatures and make them sort of parade ready, but for a unit of infantry, these guys I think are good enough to get out there and sit in objectives. So one of the things that we could do to take them further is to apply a few highlights. So to add some highlights here, what I've done is I'm just going to add a little bit of yellow to my base red and a little bit of yellow to my base green. So this will make those paints lighter, but it's also going to sort of put a bit of warmth in there as well as adding a lighter colour. So if we use this orange red, what you can do is just trace over the edges of the red parts of the miniature. So the top edge of the shoulder and the top of the bolter, anywhere where light might conceivably hit the miniature. So then also being very careful and steady and deeply regretting the 3 cups of coffee, add a little bit of this orange red to the eyes. So using that lighter green, we'll do a little bit of edge highlighting on the armour. So again, just creating the illusion of light hitting key areas here. We'll gently trace around the edge of the knee and the head here and along the line of this elbow. So some folks do this all over the model and the results are great, but just adding a few lines here and there really sells the idea of light, and to be honest, that's enough for me. So next I'm going to take a silver metallic paint, if you do have one, if you end up getting this set, there's a silver one in there. And then, much in the same style as those previous highlights, just trace out a few edges of the metallic parts of the miniature, anywhere where light might glint off the metal. But also you can sort of convey areas where the metal may have been scuffed or scraped and sort of damaged during service on the battlefield. Now, if we take a little bit of this silver paint and pop it into some gold paint, what we can do is just sort of slightly tint that, make it a little bit lighter, and add a few highlights to the gold parts of the miniature too, just in the same way. So yeah, this highlighting of the metal can be really beneficial, especially after a wash, which does have a tendency just to sort of dilute that sheen away from the metallics, so this adds a little bit of that vibrancy back. And then we're just going to do a gentle light dry brush, so just a tiny little bit of paint into your brush and just dragging it across the raised areas on the base. This can be good too, just to pick out a few details, make it a little bit sharper. And then just using the same base off-white, so I've not added any extra whitening to this, it's just that same base cream colour. I'm just going to pick out the tips of the feathers on the aquila here. Now, since this has been washed with that brown wash, the regular paint, just reapply the tips here, is going to act as a highlight anyway. And we can do that as well with the white, just using the standard white, and those white parts that we've also given the wash to, just to pick out those colours and re-establish that mid-tone. And here we go. So yeah, if we compare this marine with one of the battle-ready marines from earlier, we can see that the colours are really popping now. The armour's got a lot more sort of interesting tones, the whites and creams have got more depth, and that red highlight really works great, I think, just to add that idea of light hitting the model. And if, like me, you're a real masochist, you can add a teeny dot of white to the eyes just to complete that shine on them. So for any parts of your miniature with heavy cloth, so like on the sergeant, want to really thin down that off-white and just trace over those red areas, being careful not to run into the recesses, and that really will help to emphasize the sort of creases and folds and convey this idea of this being cloth. You can also go and bring out some of the features in the face, really bring that to life with a little bit more of that same thinned off-white, and just pick out and trace some of the details of the face, such as the brow, the cheeks, and the nose. So, rinse and repeat those highlight steps for the rest of the squad, and here are the finished miniatures, all with those highlights. So yeah, it adds a lot more depth and complexity. It didn't take too long overall, just to pick out some of those raised areas, just with a little bit of a brighter colour, or even the same one in some instances. So it's absolutely not necessary to do that step, but if you've got the time, it can add a little bit more life to your miniatures. And there's nothing to say that it can't be done after you've already used them, so if you can't wait to get them on the tabletop, take them out as a battle standard, and then you can always come back to the table later, add some extra highlights or any sort of extra things you want at a later date. Thank you so much for watching. I really hope that you enjoyed this video. If you did, please consider liking the video and subscribing to the channel. We'll have some more videos coming out very soon, and until then, thanks very much for watching.